today in this world, at this time, in this space, in this culture, in this global environment, in this cosmic environment? What is it like to be alive? Just taking a second to tune into that question. I believe that we are perfectly designed for this divine appointment, each of us, to be here in this time, in this space, for this emanation of what is. We talk a lot in Unity about divine appointments, and a divine appointment is that idea that there is a coming together at the right time and the right place, that you're always right on time. And there's also that idea that never again would this combination of consciousness be available, the specific combination of consciousness that is the makeup of this experience of what it's like to be alive. I was telling the live streamers this morning in the greeting that I appreciate their being here with us in this spiritual sanctuary, that I appreciate their consciousness, because I believe that each time we come together and we explore, we ideate, we get into alignment, we are doing it out of the consciousness that is our makeup. Every single person contributes to the consciousness that we experience each week, that we experience each Sunday, and the ahas that we get, the spiritual evolution that we get, comes from that perfect makeup of the highest consciousness that is each of us. We live in a world of divine appointments. What is it like to live in that world today? Well, one answer would be that it's living on the cusp of transformation, living at a time where we're in a tipping point era, where we are on the cutting edge of recognizing and waking up to the truth that we are co-creators in a way that has probably never physically happened before. Maybe spiritually, maybe emotionally, maybe mentally, but physically, scientifically, actually, in the fabric of our physical makeup, we are getting more and more evidence day to day, year to year, that we are co-creators. Things that used to be reserved for God, we're recognizing more and more that boundary where we and God blend, that gray area, that fine line. Have you noticed that even with the big issues that are up today, like end of life, right? Compassionate end of life, whatever you want to call it, when people are talking about, how life ends and if someone's in deep suffering. Have you recognized that this idea is so controversial because it's the concept that we're playing God. Brings up the concept that we're playing God and our discomfort with that. Our discomfort with the idea and the notion that it's a fine line and we actually have that power to make or take life. We can see it coming up all over in our world today. We can see it with gun violence, war, the barbaric nature of violence. We can see it with birth and we can see it with death. And we're struggling with these big questions. What does it mean, honestly, what does it mean that we will take our pets to the vet because they're suffering and they're in pain? And we call that completely okay. In fact, if someone were not to take their animal to the vet at the end of life and help them out, what might people say about them? You might say they're being cruel. You might say they're being selfish. Think about what you might say if an animal was suffering. And isn't it interesting that the more we love a creature, whether it's an animal or a human, the more we love them, the more compassionate our hearts become. The more we feel like they deserve compassion, they deserve life, they deserve peace, they deserve freedom from pain. But now the concept has moved not just to animals, right? But the concept has moved to people. Do we help someone? Do we ease their pain at the end of life? Is that okay? Is that not okay? It already happens, doesn't it, with doctors and nurses? People that we ordain. Some people say that MD, minor deity. People that we ordain to make these decisions. People that we say, if this person does it, then that's okay. Because to some degree, we as a culture or as a community have given them that God power to have that discernment. Because that's what happens with morphine, right? When people start getting a lot of morphine and they're in a lot of pain, that's the beginning of the end of their physical body. And if you know anything about hospice and you know anything about end of life, you know that the more morphine you get, generally, the quicker you're out of your body. Is that not the same idea? But it's very uncomfortable when we move from the idea of plants and animals to the idea of people. It's very uncomfortable when we move to the idea of doctors or those we culturally ordain to an individual having that power or that right to discern for someone else or for themselves. Think about it too with birth and that whole process, what's going on in our world with that. Very uncomfortable when we talk about having control or having an influence or having an impact. We are on the cutting edge of the discomfort of recognizing that we are co-creators. We have reserved that for the notion of the God that exists outside of us. But spiritual principle and spiritual truth tells us that God, that energy source, whatever we call it by any name, is everywhere present and always accessible all of the time, and that we're not separate from it. So what does this cutting edge look like? What does this stepping off point look like? It looks like each of us recognizing that we have a great responsibility. Because with great power and authority comes great responsibility. Society and the powers that be in cultures have kept people from knowing their power, have organized people in a way that makes it so only the ordained should be contemplating these ideas of co-creation, these ideas of right and wrong. But we're in an era now where that is all thrown out the door. And each of us has to struggle in our own way, has to meditate in our own way, has to pray in our own way to get what is unfolding. People can create life. People can take life. That's happened throughout time. That's happened throughout time. If that was a mistake, maybe it wouldn't have happened. But it does feel like a mistake, doesn't it, when life is taken or created out of negativity, out of anger, out of hatred, out of judgment, out of violence. But when it's taken or created out of love, out of compassion, out of awakening, out of mindfulness, out of doing the very best we can with that which is available in the moment, it can be a different experience, no? Can we be with the discomfort of this era? Can we be with the discomfort of this time? And rather than flailing around as individuals and collectives, resisting or hoarding this power, can we enter into a time of reverence? A time of reverence where we recognize that now more than ever, it is critical and it is essential that we elevate our consciousness, that we demonstrate and take on what the master teacher took on when he said, I and the Father are one, I and the source are one. Only through the light, only through the love, only through the way, only through me, through this me that is not separate, this me that is not an individual, this me that is the divine blueprint of all creation, this me that is you. Only through this practice will we be able to harness our infinite potential as true co-creators, as true emissaries of light. Love is trying to be birthed through us in each moment. What is it like to be alive today? What is it like to be alive today? The answer could also be, it's violent, it's environmentally destructive, it's globally concerning. It's like being present to an epidemic of discontent and depression. We could answer that question either way, couldn't we? We're on the cutting edge of consciousness. We're on the ledge of destruction. We're at the precipice of finding out that we are co-creators. There was an article I caught recently. It was by Marian Eldman. It was a HuffPost article, and the title was Guns Make Anger and Despair Lethal. I read it a few times. Guns make anger and despair lethal. I'm not here to give an opinion. It's not about my opinion anyway. I do think what the master teacher would be saying, stepping into in this day and age, I think that's a practice for each of us to take on, to say, what would the saints, the sages, the enlightened ones throughout time be saying? And I think it's good to know how they walked this physical planet. But I think too, and many of us can relate to this, if you look back at your whole life and you think about all the experiences you've had in the human condition, we might be grateful that we didn't have a weapon that was lethal in our hands. I know I have times that I can look back on and think, thank goodness there was nothing around then. It's kind of like you think about Facebook. Thank goodness there were no videos when I was growing up. Thank goodness there was no posting or checking in or, all that when I was growing up. Thank goodness as well I didn't have a gun in the house. Thank goodness my friend didn't have a gun in the house. And it's not because the gun per se, is it? Because that's just a tool. It's because the consciousness stewarding it. It's because we are still faced with this idea, it is right in our faces, that we are co-creators. So how responsible, how accountable, how integrous are we going to be with that power? How are we going to show up for it? Because if we're giving our lethal weapons to our pain bodies, of course it's going to be destructive. And the pain body gets a lot of news time in this day and age, doesn't it? We're giving these weapons, whether they're guns, whether they're judgments, whether it's shaming, whether it is crucifying, we're giving these weapons to pain bodies. We're giving them to fear. We're giving them to depression. We're giving them to anger. We're giving them to separation. It's not just about what's going on in the world in front of us. It's about what's going on in the world within us. Are we ready to look at this time and space, this day, and recognize that this is a time of developing consciousness? And every time we're distracted by everything else that tells us this will solve it, that will solve it, this will change it, that will change it, you should do this, you should do that, it should be like this, it should be like that, we shouldn't do this, we shouldn't do that, this should be legal, this should not be legal. Can we recognize that we're sitting in the discomfort of the soul's awakening to its creative potential, to its infinite potential? And that's a really uncomfortable place to be when we are being called much higher. But the solutions will not come as human solutions to the human condition. We know the carnal mind, we know our human nature, we know our ego selves, and we know that will never be tamed. But what will happen when we have a deep spiritual practice is that the self, the divine self, the aware self, the enlightened self, the awakened self, the mindful self will have dominion over the entire being. When we cultivate that dominion, we experience that dominion. And when we do, all things come together for good. All parts of ourselves. We begin to recognize that the parts of our ego, the parts of our separation, the parts of our fear, the parts of adversity that exists within us and around us will actually be used by this power. They will be used by this love to elevate and transform our minds, our consciousness, and our world. And no longer will we be able to look out at the world around us and say everything's wrong, because there will be this gray area that begins to lift and to show a new vision in which we recognize that it is simply mirroring back to us a higher calling. And a calling that is needed, that is warranted, that we've been praying in and praying for. Has anyone ever had anything happen that you got a piece of news and you thought, oh, no, 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 no. But then when you really stepped back to look at it, you went, I've been praying for this. I've been praying for this. I guess I have to admit, I've been praying for this. But when you got it, oh, no, no, no. Can we recognize that the universe loves us, supports us, and wants us to thrive? Can we recognize that what we are seeking is seeking us? Can we recognize that we are the potential of love unfolding? That's what it's like to be alive today. The Dalai Lama said, in our struggle for freedom, truth is the only weapon that we possess. Truth is the only weapon that we possess. There's a promise in 2 Corinthians 4:16. The promise is that inwardly we are being renewed day by day. Inwardly we are being renewed day by day. Rob Bell, the former pastor of Mars Hill, talked about this passage, and he talked about how in ancient Greece, they had two words that referred to the word new. The word new had two meanings, two different words. There were two different ways to say it. One was neos, and neos referred to the passing of time, as time goes by. Neos referred to the duration. But kainos referred to a different kind of newness. Kainos referred to a newness that is unrelated to time. A newness that's based, he said, on a qualitative difference, moving from one mode of being to a better mode of being. This, kainos, is the new that Corinthians is referring to. That inwardly we are being renewed day by day. But it takes a practice, doesn't it? We can't be of the world. We have to be in it, but beyond it. We have to be agents of transformation. We have to recognize our part in this spiritual practice is to take time in meditation, to set aside time every day to recalibrate our systems so that we are not tuned in and calibrated according to the chaos, according to the discord, according to the violence, but we are calibrated according to the Christ. The Christ that is beyond Christianity, the Christ that is the enlightened, awakened state of being available to all human beings, that is the divine blueprint, in fact, of the mind. In unity, we talk about the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit, the Trinity, being mind, idea, expression. So the Father is the source. That's the mind. That's divine mind. The mind that is the grand overall mind of all life, that which produces energy, love, intelligence. That just simply is. We've got mind. We've got the Father. We've got the Son. That is known traditionally as Jesus the Christ. But we know that the Christ wasn't his last name, was it? It was an acknowledgement of the state of awareness, the highest state attained in the human condition, fully bringing the spiritual condition into true reality. So that idea of that highest condition is mind idea, the idea of us. And expression is the breath, the ruha, the Holy Spirit, the wind, that which animates. So that concept of knowing that we're here to co-create, that we're here to ultimately be renewed into this consciousness, that simply by holding that practice of meditation, making the space and the time, that this is in fact the spiritual unfoldment that is available to each of us. If we would not resist it, it is the fabric of our nature. We focus so many times on our outward experiences, whether we have or we have not, giving so much credit to how we feel, whether or not we feel happy enough, giving so much credit to our circumstances. But spiritual teachings throughout the ages tell us circumstances change. It's not who we are. New technology, new emotional technology, new spiritual technology, new research in the universities is telling us we're also not our thoughts. Welcome to unity. Do you recognize how science and emotional science, mental science, is all leading humanity into the practice of unity? I'm not trying to be like an arrogant unity head here. But do you recognize this when you read research, when you read articles, when you read about what's going on? When they look at health, they're saying mindfulness and meditation is important in health. Doctors are saying it now. When they talk about self-talk, they're saying it's so important. You have 1,300 thoughts a minute or something like that, an hour, a day, I don't know. But it's constant, a constant bombardment. And they say it matters. What you think matters, what you say matters, what you believe matters. And in fact, they are talking about how your genes aren't just genes. We're not talking about the ones in your body, the ones in your body. They're not just genes, you're not just programmed. It's actually fluid. It's actually fluid. This was not around when Charles Fillmore ideated unity, when Myrtle Fillmore actualized her healing, when all of those early New Thought teachers and the mystics tried to share their experiences and give words to their experiences before there were even words to describe them. Psychology wasn't even alive yet. And they were giving word to this message. Sean Anker, who is an author and a researcher about happiness, among other things, says, happiness is the joy you feel while moving towards your potential. Happiness is the joy you feel while moving toward your potential. Think about that. Think about that as being an idea of true happiness. Not this idea of do I feel good today or bad today, which is just going to, find me in 3 minutes and I'll feel differently. Happiness is the joy we feel in moving towards our potential. So are we willing to take it on? Charles Fillmore said, the crown of life is attained by living eternally in the presence of God. Attainment depends on the understanding of science and right thinking. He also said, in all actual transformation of mind and body, a dissolving, breaking up process necessarily takes place because thought, force, and substance have been built into the errors that appear. In each individual, these errors have the power that man has given them by his thought concerning them. These thought structures must be broken up and eliminated from consciousness. Are we willing to give ourselves the space and the time and to recognize how critical it is that we become new? That we take the time apart, take the time in the silence to become new. That we reframe everything, that we take it and like a Rubik's Cube, we keep reframing it, we keep shifting it, we keep looking at it again and again and again to see the divine, to see how it is leading to the evolution of consciousness, to see how it is leading to the evolution of our minds and the elevation of our minds. Are we willing to develop our power to co-create? The difference in being, I believe, in this unity path is that we're taking it head on. We're not going to be surprised on the sideline and go, wait, what? We were co-creators? I believe that we're here to help midwife this time of spiritual transformation. Namaste.